In a world that's obsessed with what's new and what's next, there's a really interesting movement looking in the complete opposite direction. Way, way back. Today, we're diving into the New Traditionalists, a fascinating group of people turning to some of the most ancient faiths for answers in our very modern world. This is a story about faith, identity, and really a search for something solid when everything else feels like it's constantly changing.
So what's really going on here? Why are a growing number of young men in America, specifically, leaving the churches they grow up in for faiths that are thousands of years old and, frankly, way more demanding? That's the big question we're going to try and unpack.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the search for substance. What kicks this whole journey off? Then, we'll get into the push and pull factors, what they're leaving behind and what they're running towards. We'll explore the three main pillars that make these old faiths so appealing, and you'll see it's all about a tough faith. And finally, we'll connect the dots to see how this spiritual choice is creating a whole new political worldview. Okay, first up, this search for substance. And let's be clear, this isn't like someone just deciding to try a new brand of coffee. For these guys, switching churches is a huge cultural and ideological statement. It's a very conscious rejection of what they see as the mainstream. And the trend is really specific. We're seeing young men bypassing the kind of mainstream evangelicalism that many of them grew up with. But here's the key. They're not abandoning faith altogether. No, they're actively choosing something they see as more real, more authentic, and a whole lot more demanding. We're talking ancient faiths like Orthodox Christianity and traditional Catholicism. But what's actually driving that search? Well, it really comes down to this powerful push and pull. You can't understand this movement without looking at what they're rejecting just as much as what they're being drawn towards. Think of it like two giant magnets. You've got one force that's actively pushing them away from the modern church environment they know, and then you have this other incredibly strong force pulling them toward these ancient traditions they're discovering. It's that 1-2 punch that's creating such a powerful motivation for change.
And the words they use here, well, they tell you everything you need to know. The push away from modern churches comes from this perception that they've become soft, even feminized. But then on the flip side, the pull towards tradition is because it's seen as the exact opposite: demanding, hard, unapologetically patriarchal, and maybe most importantly, countercultural.
So what is the appeal, really? What are the specifics? Let's dig into the three core pillars that make these ancient traditions, particularly traditional Catholicism, so incredibly attractive to this new generation. First, you've got this pillar of ancient tradition and hierarchy. I mean, think about it. In a world that feels so unstable and chaotic, the idea of a 2,000-year-old unbroken institution, that's powerful. It's seen as this fortress of stability, a bulwark against all the noise of modern life.
The second pillar is all about aesthetics and rigor. So picture the difference between the solemn, deeply reverent atmosphere of, say, a traditional Latin Mass, and compare that to the feel of many modern megachurches, which can sometimes feel more like a rock concert. For these men, that ancient, serious solemnity is seen as inherently more masculine.
And that third pillar? It's what they see as doctrinal purity. These ancient faiths offer what looks like a totally uncompromising, objective set of truths. And that's a huge contrast to what they perceive as watered-down or ambiguous theology in other churches. It really just boils down to a hunger for clarity in a world of gray. And this brings us to what you might call the tough faith checklist. Now, here's the crucial twist, the part that might seem strange to outsiders. The very things that you'd think would scare people away, the difficulty, the strictness, those are actually the main selling points. It's a deliberate embrace of a harder path. This checklist really has 4 key parts. It starts with the physical, strict, rigorous observance. Then it moves into the home with a full embrace of patriarchy. From there, it gets personal, demanding a life of moral purity. And finally, all of that shapes a very unique political view, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And that physical rigor, it's a feature, not a bug. We're talking about long services that require you to stand for hours, full prostrations on the floor, really strict fasting schedules, and complex, chanted liturgies. The difficulty itself is seen as proof that you're serious about your commitment. Next up are these 2 tightly connected ideals: traditional gender roles and moral purity. This means a clear, unambiguous embrace of patriarchy, where the man is the spiritual head of the household. But that leadership role is tied directly to a disciplined focus on self-control and personal purity, which is a total rejection of modern ideas about promiscuity.
But, this spiritual shift doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's absolutely creating a new political worldview, which brings us to our final section. This choice has huge ideological implications that reach far beyond the walls of a church.
So to really get this new political view, we first have to understand the old one. For decades, there was this thing called the Judeo-Christian consensus, and that was basically the powerful political alliance in the 20th century between American evangelicals and a neoconservative, very pro-Israel foreign policy.
And here is where the break just becomes crystal clear. Now, while these new traditionalists often agree with the old guard on a lot of social issues, they split off sharply on two key things: their intense focus on pre-modern tradition, and, this is the big one, their foreign policy, specifically their stance on Israel.
This new worldview is really defined by a deep, strong skepticism of foreign wars. It's an explicit rejection of that long-standing political consensus we just talked about, and that absolutely includes vocal criticism of American support for Israel.
So where does all this leave us? We've just walked through a movement built on rejecting what it sees as modern softness for ancient rigor, both in faith and in politics. And I guess the final question is this: is this embrace of difficulty just a passing trend, or are we watching the very beginning of a much larger, lasting cultural shift? That's the thought we'll leave you with.